In this video, I'm going to focus on how to set up the Chatbot application using the Python Anywhere hosting package. To complete this installation will require a few different things. First, you will need a version of Python downloaded to your local computer, and this should be at least Python version 3.8. You will also need the files for the prep scripts and the Flask application itself, which can be found in the GitHub repository. So there'll be two directories, one here for the prep scripts and one here for the Chatbot Flask tool. So you'll need to, at the very least, download the prep scripts to your local computer, and ideally also the Chatbot tool, because we'll move this to the Python Anywhere space a little bit later on in this installation process. So download the entire repository to your own computer. You will also need an OpenAI account, and once you have that, an API key for the OpenAI API as well. You will need an account on Python Anywhere, and this can either be a free account or a paid one. There are some, obviously, limitations to a free account on Python Anywhere, but you should at least be able to get the application running using the free account. I think the biggest limitation is probably the lack of a customized URL and also some storage space issues, but you should be able to at least get the code running, get a Flask application running in the free account, and then if you need to sign up for a paid account. And you will also need some form of FTP client. We are going to be, as I mentioned, moving the files for the Flask application from your local computer to Python Anywhere, and ideally you would do that using some form of FTP client. I've provided some links to some resources on how to both download and set up Python, use the FileZilla FTP client, which is a favorite of mine and it's free. Also some information on how to sign up for the OpenAI API key, and also a link to the Python Anywhere hosting service. So I have all of those links both in the GitHub repository and also in the description of this video. So again, once you have all of these different things into place, you should be ready to go to set up the Chatbot application. So the first step to setting up the Chatbot application is to prepare the files that the Chatbot uses for its knowledge base. This is done using two preparation scripts included in the GitHub repository, and they're named generic datagather.py and generic embedding.py. The data gathering script will gather article data from news websites and typically would run on your local computer. So this is again why we had to install Python on our own machine, our own local machine. And so let's take a very quick look at the file here. I'm not going to go through all the details, but it's a relatively simple script that uses the newspaper 3K library to scrape different websites that are from a provided text file. And so I'll take a little look at this text file. This is a sample file that I have provided in the GitHub repository. It's obviously doesn't contain a lot of URLs, so your final version will have more URLs for different news articles. But I just wanted to give you a little bit of a sample here. So here is 10 different URLs from, in this case, the conversation website. And I have this saved as a CSV file, but you could save it as a .txt file. It could really be anything as long as this information is contained as text. But essentially, it's very simple. We have one URL on each one of these lines, and the data gathering script essentially will read through this file and collect the article information for each one of the URLs listed here. So it's relatively simple. So let's go through some of the steps on how to run this code. And the one thing to note before you install or before you use this script is that it has a couple of Python libraries that are required to run it. So I've mentioned one already, the newspaper 3K library. This script also requires the pandas, the kind of data manipulation library. And it also requires the transformers library to use this tokenizer for GPT-2. Essentially, this will give us the number of tokens in each one of the article sections that we have in the script. So if you haven't already installed these applications or these Python libraries, you will need to do so. And it's a simple process for each one of these libraries. So I've listed these details on the GitHub repository, but you essentially go pip if you already have Python installed. So you go pip and then install, and then the name of the library that you want to install. So in this case, we'll start off with newspaper 3K. I already have them installed, so you'll see a little bit of a different message when I press enter here. But essentially, once this is done, in my case, it says already satisfied, but in your case, it'll go through the process of actually installing the specific library. We also, as I said, have to install pandas. So we go pip install pandas, and this will install the latest version of pandas. Again, I already have it installed, so I have messages here that say it's already satisfied. And then the final Python library that's required for this script is the transformers library. So you go pip install, and then transformers. And again, I already have it, but if you didn't, it would go through the entire process of downloading it and setting it up to use on your local machine. So once you have those 3 libraries set in place, you should be good to run this script. So the way that this script runs, as I mentioned, is that it reads a simple text file of URLs for news articles, and it's going to scrape the article information from each one of those URLs. As I said, you must create this file list of URLs, and I have included a sample version of how it will look. So here are, 10 different article URLs, but your knowledge base obviously will need more. So you're going to probably want to find some type of source that has, hundreds of articles, or maybe 100 probably at the very least. So you're going to work on something that has more URLs, and this process will take a little bit more time. Again, we do that web scraping using the newspaper 3K library, and it works pretty well at grabbing information from different kind of standard news websites. As long as your information on your sites are relatively, not behind paywalls or things like that, it should be able to grab it quite well. It's typically only grabbing the title, the article text, and also that link, which it already has, but it does it again. So it should run relatively quickly. One thing I forgot to mention is that I'm running these Python commands in a command prompt on Windows. If you happen to be doing this on Mac OS, you could open up a terminal window. So you've downloaded these kind of preparation scripts to your local computer. You've installed Python. You want to go to the directory where you have those scripts downloaded, and you want to run these scripts using Python. And I'll show you how to do that. There's a couple of command line options that have been set for these scripts. And I'll run through what they actually are. So to run any kind of Python program, you first type in Python, and then the name of the script that you want to run. So in this case, it is generic datagather.py. Windows automatically adds this little slash to it, but it'll work either way as long as you're in the directory that you're running it. And then you have to go -i, and then you specify the file name of your list of URLs. And so in this case, it is unique links sample.cv. Again, you don't necessarily have to put in this /. It'll work without it. Let's just remove it so it simplifies things a bit. So that's essentially -i stands for input. And then we also want to specify what our output is. And so we are going to save these articles in a format that is going to be used by our next script, which will create the embedding for our file. So we want to specify what that output file will be. So we want to specify something different. So maybe we could go articles.cv. And so this is when this whole process is complete, our articles will be saved and ready in this article.cv file. So I went through some of this already, but essentially what will happen when I run this script here is that when provided with a collection of article links as a text file, the script will use the newspaper 3K Python library to scrape the article title and text from each website. The data gatherer splits these articles by paragraph. So essentially, it chunks the text of the article into smaller sections by the paragraphs. The OpenAI API places some limits on its use and calculates much of its pricing based upon content length. And so these limits are generally calculated using tokens, which in basic terms are segments of words. Generally, one token is considered to be approximately 4 English characters. So the data gatherer script truncates paragraphs of more than 500 tokens in an effort to kind of limit some of the costs that we'll come across when we do the embedding script. Shorter paragraphs of less than 5 tokens are also removed from the data set, as at least I have found that these short paragraphs were generally article subheadings or sometimes image descriptions that really did not provide a lot of kind of useful contributions to the chatbot knowledge base. So as I mentioned, this script will save the article paragraph data in a comma-separated file, the file that we specify here, articles.cv in this case, with each one of these paragraphs in one row with the following data in each one of those rows. So there's a unique ID, the article title, the paragraph text, the article link, and the number of tokens within the paragraph. So I'm going to run this script now, and it'll run relatively quickly because, again, I only have 10 URLs in my sample. But when this script is complete, we'll have a chance to take a look at what this kind of article CSV file looks like. So we'll run it now. And it is, again, scraping the articles from the site. I have some information here about also how long the script takes to run. So to do only 10 websites scraped, it only takes 3 seconds. But again, if you have 100, 200 sites, it's going to take more time. But essentially, we should now have a file called article CSV that has split our article data into kind of paragraph chunks. So let's look at that. So here it is, article.csv. Also, one thing to note, I'm using Visual Studio Code as a text editor to look at these files. And so another potential requirement for doing this work might be to have some form of text editor on your local computer to work with these files. Notepad on Windows is fine for this case, but it's nice to use a text editor like Visual Studio Code or something else because you get some extra features. For example, code highlighting, as you can see here, the different pieces of code have different colors, which makes it a little easier to work with. You also have some coding suggestions as well as you work along here. So a text editor can make working with these files a little bit easier. And I'm using Visual Studio Code, but there's lots of different ones available for both Windows and Macs and Linux OS. So we have our finished article CSV file. Let's open it and see what it looks like. So here we go. It is a CSV file. As we can see here, the names of the columns are listed in this first row. And then we have a whole bunch of rows. So in this case, 263 different rows of the different paragraphs contained within our articles. And each one of these rows, as I mentioned, has a unique ID and then contains the title, the article text, the article link, and the number of tokens contained within the line of text, the paragraph that we've split up. And you can see here that essentially these, let's say, first, I think it's 29 rows are all for one article. So again, it's split up this article into all of these different segments. And you'll see that throughout. So we have 10 articles, and each one of these different articles has been split up into a number of different paragraph segments. And that makes doing some of the embedding calculations that we are going to do in the next section a little bit easier. So now that our article data is saved in a CSV file split up into paragraphs, the second step of the process of getting the data ready for our chatbot application is running our embedding script, which is the generic embedding.py file contained within the GitHub repository. This file will prepare the article data from this data gathering step that we just did for text comparison. To compare the similarity of two pieces of text, the distances between their two vector representations are calculated. The shorter the distance between the two vectors, the more similar the pieces of text are. To calculate the embedding values for each article paragraph, our embedding script sends each paragraph text to the OpenAI API and employs their text embedding 3 large model. A multi-dimensional embedding vector is returned for each one of these paragraphs. The embedding values for each paragraph and the original CSV data from the data gatherer script are also stored in 2 separate pickle files as part of this script. Pickle files are binary representations of data, and it was found that using pickle files dramatically increased the speed performance of the chatbot prototype, especially within the initial loading time. The generic embedding.py file requires a couple of different external Python libraries. One is the pandas library, which we should already have installed as we needed it for the generic data gathering.py script. But if you haven't, do install it now. And then the other requirement will be the OpenAI Python library, which will allow our Python programming to interface with the OpenAI API. So if you haven't already installed it, go pip install OpenAI, press enter. And in my case, I've already installed it on my local computer, so it says essentially the requirements are already satisfied. But in your case, if you have not, it will download the library and all the required dependencies, and then you should be ready to be set up and go for your the running of this generic embedding script. The one other thing you will have to add is your OpenAI API key. So again, this was one of the requirements for your for running these scripts. And there's a section within generic embedding.py right here within the code where you're going to have to essentially put in your OpenAI API key for this embedding functionality to work. I've obviously left it empty here for security reasons, but for this to run, you will need to put a data in here, a piece of your API key data in here so that the script will run. So once we have our key added to generic embedding.py and we have our required libraries added, we can run the script in a similar way to how we ran the generic data gather.py file. So we'll just type in Python. Again, we're going to run this command within the directory where our script has been downloaded. And then the name of the file, so generic embedding.py. And then we are going to go -i, and we are going to specify the article file that we created with the generic data gather.py file. So in this case, in my case, it was articles.csv. And then we'll just press enter. Actually, I spelled embedding wrong here. We need 2 Ds. All right, try it again. And theoretically, it will use the OpenAI API to create an embedding for every one of the paragraphs that is contained within our articles.csv file. And then once this process is complete, it will save a pickle file of these embeddings. And also, as I mentioned, creates a pickle file for the articles as well. So all that is doing is essentially taking that CSV file and converting it to a pickle file. We will use both of these pickle files within our Flask application, and having them be pickle files essentially sped up the load time of the Chatbot Flask application. And this embedding process can take quite a long time. It won't be too bad for me because I was only doing it on 10 articles, but you may find when you have 100 or 150, 200 articles, this process may take about a bit of time. So let it run, and when it's finished, you should theoretically have a message that says a pickle file for the embeddings has been created. So there we go. We have now our script has completed. We have our 2, as the message says here, our 2 pickle files. In my case, it took a little over a minute, so 76 seconds. And this was for article data from only 10 different articles. So this process, this script could take quite a while, depending on how many articles, how many lines are contained within your article CSV file. So you can see here in our directory, we have 2 pickles. We could open these files, but they're binary representations of data. So they're not going to actually, you're not going to see anything when you open them. They're not going to look like CSV files. But essentially these 2 pickle files, the articles.pickle file and the embedding_articles.pickle file, will be the source of your knowledge base when you run the Flask application. So once we have those 2 pickle files set up, we can begin the process of setting up our Flask application. And as I mentioned, I'm going to go through that process by showing how you do it in the Python Anywhere hosting package. I think this works well because it's a relatively accessible tool. They have a variety of different pricing tiers for the account, including a free one, which should allow for relatively simple usage of different Flask applications. So the first step to set up things would obviously be to log into your Python Anywhere account. This is the dashboard that you will essentially see as part of that account. And we want to open up a bash console. Essentially, this is a console that allows us to run Unix commands, and it's all web-based. You could, if you really wanted to, set up some kind of SSH client that could connect to Python Anywhere. They have some details on how to do that within their site, but I'm just going to use this web-based console because we don't really have to do a lot with the command line here for Windows. And I'm going to keep a version of the dashboard open. So essentially, if you click on the console, it creates a console window, and I'll keep another tab here with my various dashboard pieces open. So within the console, the first thing we want to do is set up a directory for our chatbot to live. So we can do that using the Linux command mkdir, so which is essentially for make dir, and then we're going to specify a directory. So in this case, maybe we'll just call it chat demo, spell it right, and there we go. So once we have the directory that we're going to store our chatbot application in, we're going to want to make a few changes to some of the configuration files for the chatbot tool itself before we upload all of these files to the Python Anywhere space. And so we're going to do that essentially in two files. One is called config.py, and this, as you can see here, contains a lot of the information for the different models that you're going to use, and also will contain the path for the two pickle files that are going to be stored within your Python Anywhere space. And so we want to give file paths for these two pickle files. I would recommend staying with this directory structure because this is essentially what I'm going to show you in a little bit. But you want to, if you happen to change either the names of these files or the location of these files, you will need to change these variables within the config.py file. I would recommend keeping all of these prompt settings the same, but if you want to play with some of the settings for the chat completion functionality of OpenAI, you can change them here. And then you will see here that we have two environment variables being set for both the OpenAI key and the chat password. And from what I understand, using a .env file is a somewhat more secure way to use private information within your scripts. So they're outside of the application process itself. So that's essentially what these two lines are doing here. I've set both of them using this kind of OS environ get command. But essentially what you have to do is specify what your API key is and your chat password is in a .env file. I've created an example or a sample here in the kind of GitHub repository, but what you're going to need to do is rename this to .env and then specify your key in this line and the password that you want to use for the chatbot in this second line. And one note is that the key is not contained within quotation marks and the password is. So essentially, your key that you created within your OpenAI API account will be specified here. The password that you want to use for your chatbot is going to be specified here. And then you will rename this file from sample.env to .env. So you can rename, this is in Visual Studio Code, but I could do something to this effect, and then I would be ready to go. The part of the reason why I put sample.env is that GitHub hides env files without .env files. So I wanted to make sure that it could be seen in the repository. So essentially, you will need to change this file from sample.env to .env and specify your specific OpenAI key here and your password here. And then once you've done that, you will be ready to upload these files to the Python Anywhere space. So now that we have this directory set up, we will want to move all of our Chatbot Flask application files to this directory. And I'm going to do that using the FileZilla FTP client. There's a variety of different FTP clients. I believe you could also probably do it using this file functionality within Python Anywhere's dashboard, but I think it's relatively simple enough to do it with with something like FileZilla. So I have included some details on how to download and use FileZilla in the GitHub repository and also the description of this video, but it's relatively simple. It's got a common approach to several different FTP clients. It's relatively simple to use FileZilla. You will have to create some details on how you connect to your Python Anywhere server. I will provide a link on how to do that within, again, the description in the GitHub repository. But once you are connected to the server, you will want to find the directory that you just created. So in my case, as we saw, I created a directory called chat demo. Everything on the server, on the Python Anywhere server, is represented here on the right-hand side, and on the left-hand side is your files from your local computer. So you'll want to kind of select or highlight that directory on your local computer. So I'll double click on it. So now that directory is open, it is empty, and I want to move all of the files from my that I've downloaded from the repository into this directory. So I'll just do that by right-clicking on all these files and go upload. All right, so now all of the required files have been uploaded to the Python Anywhere directory that we created in that first step. So essentially what you want to do is download everything from the GitHub repository for the Flask project, which is contained within this chatbot tool directory. So everything here is what you want to upload to the directory that you've just created. So once our files have been uploaded, we're going to want to return to the Python Anywhere bash console and set up a couple of the required libraries for our script. And we are going to do this by setting up a virtual environment. And to do that is relatively simple. And again, the text of these commands will be contained within the GitHub repository, but I wanted to go through the process a little bit. I'm going to change to our directory. I'm going to go within our chat demo directory. It's not really required, but I like moving into our directory while we're running some of these scripts. And then I'm going to set up a virtual environment. And you do that within Python Anywhere by going mk virtual env. And then you will specify the version of Python that you would like to use. In our case, it's going to be Python version 3.8. So you go Python and then equal, then you have to specify where it lives within the server space. So user bin Python 3.8 in the case of Python Anywhere. And then you want to give your chatbot environment a name. We will call it chat demo env. You may want to write this down, as I'm going to do right now, just so you have a reference for it, because you're going to have to specify this within the chatbot dashboard when you are going through the settings for Python Anywhere. So then once we've done that and we press enter, it should set up the virtual environment. And this virtual environment is essentially going to be a space, an enclosed space for us to create all of our different Python packages that are required. It's a nice way to approach using Python scripting, because your different Python projects might have different version requirements for different scripts, and allows you to kind of contain all of the project requirements into one virtual environment and not have them affect a different project running on the same server. So once you've once you've created this in virtual environment, it'll actually activate it for you. So you can see that now in front of our little console here, command line, we have chat demo env contained within brackets. And that indicates that we are now running commands in our virtual environment. This is where we can now install our packages and everything. We want to ensure that we have run the virtual environment before we work on it. And so if you ever had to, it is running now, but if you had to run it again, if you had to leave or whatever this environment, you can go work on and then the name of your virtual environment, and it will start it again. But we are working in it now. If you ever wanted to clear your command console, you can just do it by typing clear, which makes it a little bit cleaner. So now what we're going to do is install the required packages as part of this chatbot application. And there are several, and this is going to take a little bit of time. So we'll start off by doing numpy. So pip install numpy. NumPy. We'll let it run. This will give us a chance to see what it looks like when a pip install is done fresh. Sometimes it takes a little while depending on the size of the package. So what it's essentially doing is downloading the specified package and all of the required dependencies for that package. And that can sometimes take a little bit of time. So we've now installed NumPy. We want to install pandas. So all of these commands will be very similar. So pandas is now installed. We want to install the tick token library. This, I believe, provides some token counting functionality for us. We then want to install Flask itself. So this is our web framework for Python. Then we will install the Flask-WTF package, which provides some extra functionality for forms in Flask. It helps us use some functionality for our chatbot password application functionality and the entering of the questions. So pip install -u in this case, Flask -WTF. And then we want to, again, as we did on our local computer, install the OpenAI library so that we can access the API through our Python scripts. Then we finally will want to install the python.env package. This allows us to use our .env file within the Python Anywhere hosting package. So python-.env. And there we go. So now we have all of our required libraries installed as part of our virtual environment. So we will now move towards our dashboard again, and we will set up a web application. So one additional Python library that I forgot to mention that you will need to install is the Flask session Python library that helps us a little bit with file-based Flask sessions. So you just go to install it, you go pip install, and then install, then Flask, then dash session, and it should install the application. And the one other thing you'll have to do as part of setting up to use Flask sessions is set up a Flask session directory, and we'll do that within our project directory. So in this case, as I said, we are in the chat demo directory for our project. We can see that by going pwd, and we are going to have to create a Flask _session directory in this directory. So we can do that by going make dir and then Flask _session, and it will have to be this exact name, at least as the code is created now. It'll have to be in this exact location. Now, if we look through the directory structure for this project, you can do that by typing ls. You can see that there is now a Flask session directory, and all of our session information will be contained within that directory. Again, another requirement for this project. So now that we have our virtual environment set up and all of our Python requirements as far as libraries installed as well, we will want to set up a web application within Python Anywhere for our chatbot to run on. And you can do that in the dashboard by going to the Open Web tab. Because I have a web application already set up within Python Anywhere, I have to create a new one. And in my case, my tier allows more than one web application. If you have one of the lower tiers, you may not be able to create a second application. So in my case, I can. So I'm going to click on this Add New Web App button here. And then I'm going to have to specify which domain I want to use. In my case, I'm already using the domain that I signed up with, so I'm going to have to specify a new domain. And so what I'm going to do is call it chatbot-demo-stuartduncan.pythonanywhere.com. And again, you can essentially extend the hosting domain that you have through Python Anywhere by adding any kind of thing with a dash in front of it. So in this case, chatbot demo stuartduncan.pythonanywhere.com. And this allows me to essentially create another web application using the Python Anywhere domain name, so that I do not have to create a custom domain. I won't go into it within this video, but if you did want to kind of create some form of URL using a pre-existing domain, so in my case stuartduncan.ca is a domain that I own, you can do that using CNAME records, and I will provide some resources again on how to do that within the description of this video or on the GitHub repository. But for simplicity's sake, I'm going to use the kind of Python Anywhere name that I already have, and because I'm already using stuartduncan.pythonanywhere.com, I will specify this domain. So again, once that's all set up, you can then press next. And that will give you the option to specify what kind of framework that you would like to use. And what we are going to do is specify manual configuration. And then you have to choose a Python version. And in this case, we're going to go with Python 3.8. And then, you can read this little thing, but it essentially says that you're going to manually set up your WSGI file. So click next. Takes a little bit of time to set up. But when that process is complete, you will be brought to a dashboard with the kind of configuration options for your new web application, which will be contained at this URL you've specified here. On this page, there's a few things that you're going to have to change to get your chatbot application working. So the first thing that you're going to want to specify is the virtual environment that you've created as part of that kind of earlier process. So you can do that by just clicking on this little link here within this virtual end section, and then just give the name of the virtual environment that you've created. And so in my case, it was chatdemo.env, and then press the little check mark. And it now recognizes that you are using this specific virtual environment for your code. You will also, might be a good idea to reload the application at this point. So you can do that by clicking on this little button here. So then what you will do after that kind of virtual environment is set up, you need to set your working directory as well. So you can click on that here. It defaults to your kind of working directory of your entire package, but you're going to want to specify the directory that your chatbot is contained in. In my case, it's chat demo. I'll put a trailing slash. I'm not sure if it matters. And then press the little check mark. So that is the directory where my Flask application is contained within. You're also going to have to go down here and change your static files information. And I generally just ensure that this is static and press the little check mark. And then we will enter a path for this directory. And in this case, it's going to be the directory within your chatbot subdirectory that will contain your static files. And so in my case, it will be /home/stuartduncan/chatdemo/static. And then you press the little check mark. So you have to set two things. Set this to static, the URL, and then the directory to the specific static directory that your chat application is going to be using for its static files. So we've done that. We now want to move your two pickle files, you want to FTP your two pickle files into this directory. So both your articles pickle file and your embedding file will be moved into this directory that you've specified here. So one additional thing that you will have to do as part of the setup process for this chatbot application is you're going to change the default information for the WSGI configuration file. So I've already done it in the case of my Python application, my Flask application, and I'll provide this code within the GitHub repository. But essentially, when you first set up the manual configuration of a Flask application using Python Anywhere, you're going to have a very long amount of information in this file. What you're going to want to do is change it to just what is contained here. And you're going to have to specify, you can change a couple of things in what I have listed here. You're going to have to essentially put your directory for your project within this 4th line. And then in this 7th line here, you're going to specify the path to that application. So in my case, it's /home/StuartDuncan/demo, chat demo, sorry. So in your case, you're going to have to change this line to whatever your path is for your application. You can find out what your path is by using the pwd command within the directory that you've created for your chatbot application. So in my case, you can see when I run that command, you can see home/StuartDuncan/chatdemo. So you'll need to know what that directory is for the WSGI file, which is contained here. And you'll just have to change it. So it's going to be /home/ the name of your account, and then / the directory you put your Flask application in. Once you've made these changes and added this code, this essentially allows us to know where our Flask application is, and also sets up the ability to use our .env files. Once you've done that, you will click on Save. And then you can click on this little Python to get back to your web applications. And then you can reload our application. And then theoretically, once we have done that reloading, sometimes takes a little bit of time, we should be able to go to the URL specified here. I'm just right-clicking on it, and then you will see our chatbot application. So you should be able to run it by specifying the password that you specified in your .env file. I've already entered it. Click Submit. So once you've entered into the password, you should see the chatbot application. In this case, my chatbot is based upon articles from the conversation about opioids. So if I enter a question here, what are opioids? There we go. And press Enter or press the Submit button. We should see it respond with a question. It has this little thinking spinner here while it decides what the question response will be. And there you go. After your initial question, it kind of changes to this format, giving your question and a response, the sources that were used to create that question, and also some suggested follow-ups. If we click on any of these suggested follow-ups, it will create a new question and response based upon that follow-up. You can answer additional questions down here, like why are they dangerous? And that will create a response for that specific question. Takes a bit of time. And so you can see here there is a response based upon that question and your knowledge base. You can reset the chat by clicking the Reset Chat button, brings you back to that initial screen. So that's essentially the Chatbot Flask application. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me.